Is over for her dad. That was before we was ever married, though. That's where I seen her at first.
He come over to our house. I didn't know anybody like him existed. And
I was born in Kentucky, Aberdeen, Kentucky. Sits right on the Green River near Morgantown. 8th day of March, 1910.
I was born at Waynesville, out here about 4 miles, in 1911.
1911?
February the 3rd.
Where at exactly? What place?
Well, it was at my grandparents' house.
Which is where?
Out there about 4 miles and a half.
What was your father's full name?
Alfred Wayne Phelps. When I was born, he was running a little grocery store, sits on the banks of the Green River. And shortly after that, he moved out to what you would call on a farm. And he farmed there until the World War was 1917, when they come almost to getting my dad into the service, even if he did have 4 kids. And shortly after just before he was to be called, it was over. Then shortly after that, we moved up in Upper Butler County, and he bought a farm up there, and he farmed. He raised cattle, some hogs, and tobacco, and some corn.
What was your father's full name?
Harry Sinclair Johnson. He was born down south around Mulberry Grove in 1887.
What did he do for a living?
My dad, he always farmed. He was a farmer.
Do you have any special hobbies or interests? Or?
Well, he liked to garden, and he had bees and liked to fish.
Okay, what was your mother's full name?
Bell, Essie Bell James. Essie Bell James.
What? Tell me about her.
Well, she was a real small woman. And I will say it like this so you can plainly understand it. She never did weigh 100 pounds, only just before she is going to have a little one.
What was your mother's full name?
Ada Bell Johnson. She was born in 1889, and she was born at Kinney. Mm-hmm.
What was her maiden name?
Wampler. Mm-hmm. Edna Wampler was her maiden name.
Tell me, what about her? Did she have any interests or?
Oh, not anything special. No, she never got to go to high school because my grandmother was sick so much at the time. She had to stay at home. There was 6 or 7 other kids, and she was the oldest, and she more or less had to look after the kids. She didn't get to go to high school.
Okay, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 2 sisters and 1 brother. You mean by my mother or?
Just all together.
All together.
Oh, I had 6.
6. What were their names?
Their names? My Lolene was the oldest girl, and Geraldine was the next oldest one, that is, other than me. She's just under me. And then Robert and Harlan and Grace, but now that's half brothers and sisters. They live in over Stanford.
Okay, how many brothers and sisters do you have, or did you have?
Well, I had, four brothers, I think, and one sister.
What were their names?
Well, Owen's the youngest, and then there was Willie. He was next to me, and he died when he was 2 years old with whooping cough. And then there was Ernest, and he was, I can't remember what, I don't even know what year he was born in, but he was a bleeder, and he bled to death when he was 2 years old. And the other one, I don't think he was ever named, and he was, what do I want to say? Stillborn. That's what I'm trying to say. That awful, I can't think what I want to say. And then Carolyn, she was the only other girl besides myself. She just lived 3 weeks.
What's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory, well, when we moved from where I was born at, down on the farm, which belonged to my uncle. My dad farmed there, and that's really my first memories of, and that's where I lived when I first started the school.
Can you think of something specific you were doing, or looking at, or anything?
Oh, not really. Had a little wooden toy wagon I got through Santa Claus. I had a lot of interest in that thing.
Okay, Mom. What is your earliest memory?
Well, I'll tell you one or two of them. And they had one of them old willow baby buggies, and I had a bunch of kittens. And I had them so I could just lay them down and cover them up right under their chin and wheel them all around. And I got too close to the cellar door opening, and one wheel went off, and the cats went everywhere. With their tails up over their back, they were scared to death. Then one of them was Willie. That was my brother next to me. I stole his bottle one day out of his baby buggy when he's outside. Mom had him wheeled out there on the walk, and I stole his bottle, and I heard her coming, and I run. And I fell down, and that's what this scar is in my hand right here. It just gouged out a place like that. And I know she took me in the house and set me on a chair and got the bottle of peroxide. Of course, you know, peroxide don't hurt, but it foams. And I just screamed like, it didn't hurt me at all, couldn't feel anything, but I was scared to death. I thought it was going to kill me, you know. And disinfect is what she's doing.
Okay, what is a strong memory you have of something that you did with your mother?
Well, one of the main strong things was the last time my mother ever stepped foot on the soil before she passed away. I went with her one night down to my uncle's to get a dress pattern off of my aunt, and all the rest of them stayed at home, and I went with Mom, and I carried the lantern. And that's the last time that she's ever had a foot on the ground before she passed away. She passed away in 1920 with World War flu.
So you were 10 years old?
Yep.
Okay, Mom, what is a memory, what is a strong memory of something that you did with your mother?
Oh. Well, we didn't have any car in them days. We just had a horse and buggy, and I know 2 different times that there was a funeral here in time, and we lived in that little house Pop built over that little square one, you know. And we walked and waded the creek and come to town, carried our shoes across the creek and come to town, put them back on, went to the funeral. And one of them was right down here on the corner where Johnny Arnfelt used to live. Let's see, the other one was, oh, I can't think where that funeral was at, but that's where one of them was at, where Johnny lived.
Okay, what's a strong memory of something you did with your dad?
Well, we used to always cut and tie timber to make ties out of. And then
railroad ties?
Yeah, right. And then in the wintertime, I was a strong boy on a horse, pulling all of that top of that stuff in the wood, where we had a place to cut our wood up, saw it up, chop it up. That was a strong memory.
Okay. What's a strong memory you have of something you did with your dad?
Well, we used to play and sing at community clubs every once in a while, down at the Prairie Creek School where I went to school at. And I guess that's the main place that we did play and sing. There wasn't too much social activities going on then, you know, in them days.
Do you remember any particular advice or words of wisdom he ever gave you that specifically just you?
Well, not especially. He didn't talk much, and I mean, if I didn't do what he wanted me to do, well, I heard about it, but then that's not anything special that I can say. I can tell you one time how he gave me 2 whippings that I didn't deserve.
Tell me.
That house that he built down there, and of course, everybody had fences in around their yards, and it was a new fence, and we always had a bunch of kittens around. And anyway, I had them kittens up there at that gate post going into the yard, and anyway, I'd take them kittens and I'd run them up that gate post, walk them up the gate post, you know. I'd done it over and over, and he was walking back and forth across the barn lot, carrying feed and stuff to the hogs and the chickens and stuff. And anyway, he seen me doing that, you know, all the time. And pretty soon that kitten went up by itself. And I said, "Oh, look, Pop, that cat went up itself." He said, No, it didn't go up itself. And I said, "Oh, yes, it did." And I got it, because he thought I was lying to him. I wasn't. Then the other time was when we lived over at the Weichel place, and we had that long old cattle shed. I know you can't even remember that, Georgie. But we was gone late, and anyway, they told me to go out and gather the eggs. And of course, there's some of the hens always laid down in that cattle shed. Well, it was dark, and I was scared to go down there, and I told them I went when I didn't. And I got it again. Yeah.
Do you have a strong memory of something you did with your brothers and sisters?
Well, not really. Only them days was just play. That's the only thing we was interested in. But of course, in later years, why, of course, it was different. But then that was just it was all play.
Okay. What's a strong memory you have of something you do with your brothers and sisters or your cousins? Or
Well, my cousins mostly. I rode a horse and got cows earlier in this, but when I went to high school, that's how I got my high school education, on horseback. Most all the country kids did. I think all but 2 of them rode horseback. But anyway, of course, I had the horse that I rode, Old Beauty, all the time, and we had Old Daisy. She was a workhorse. What was she? She had them big white feet. You remember that? Persian or whatever it is that has them long-haired white feet. And anyway, you could ride her, but she was a big old, you know, a workhorse. And anyway, I loved for some of them kids to come out from town there and put them on her. Of course, I'd ride Beauty. And I'd give her a little tap, and away she'd go. She could trot as fast as most horses could run. She was a big horse. And she went down the hill over her, you know, down past Hawkins's, right straight on down towards the creek. And I was just laughing my head off, you know, at her bounce around her. She couldn't hardly hang on to the reins and hang on to the horse, too. And we got almost down to the creek right there, and I was getting scared then. I was afraid that horse would run up there and stop all at once and just pitch her off, you know, in the water. But she stopped just before we got to the edge of the creek. And but I remember, it got so it wasn't funny there. I thought they were going to run up there and just stop all at once and just let them go over her head, you know, right into the creek. And
Describe the house that you grew up in.
Well, the house I grew up in mainly was when my mother passed away. It was a log house, and it had a fireplace in each room. It just had 2 rooms now, and it had a fireplace in each one of them. One of them had the kitchen in it, and the other one was just where you lived at.
What kind of furniture did you have?
Oh, just rocking chairs and straight chairs and all that, dressers and all that. That's, you know, nothing them days. You had nothing but very little.
What were the walls like and the floor?
Well, they was all, well, I can't describe how it was papered. It was papered with 3-foot wide stuff, big heavy papers up and down, and the ceiling all, because the logs was above them, see.
And the floors were just, did you have rough?
Just plain rough wood, not even planed. It was, you could see the saw marks in it. And in fact, you could see the chickens walk underneath the house in small cracks. Yeah.
Describe the house that you grew up in.
well, I lived in, 4 houses during the time I was growing up, I guess. That little square house down there is one Pop built, and that's where Owen was born, you know. And I can't remember too much. See, I was just 5 years old when we moved there. And I really can't remember too much about it in a way. Then we moved up to the Wyco place, and that's when I had to I started riding horseback to school, and I'd take the cows to the pasture in the morning, and then I'd go get them of an evening on my road home from school, see, and take them up to the barn as I went.
What did the inside of the house look like? What?
You mean which house now?
Well, maybe the Wyco place, if that's the one.
Well, I don't know. It wasn't anything fancy or outstanding in any way. Just, I don't know whether it was about, well, let's see, 1, 2, about a 5-room house, I guess, and then there was 2 rooms upstairs. But it was, you know, just an old house. Wasn't very anything.
Did it leak in the winter? I mean, did the wind blow through?
No, it was all right that way, but it just wasn't a fancy, it was just an old house. Nothing fancy about it.
You heated with coal or?
Wood.
Wood?
Mm-hmm. In them days, we heated with wood.
Who was responsible for keeping the wood in the house?
Me! I carried cobs and wood, and we didn't know anything about coal in them days. I didn't. But I carried wood and cobs and stuff like that in the house.
When did you first get electricity?
1943.
1943.
Same time I did.
How long? How did you keep your food fresh before you got electricity?
We had a if we didn't have a storm cellar, we just had to have, we had an old ice box that you bought great big ice, 40 and 50 pound sizes, and had a place to put it in just a regular ice box. Took the place of a refrigerator motor.
Okay, Mom, tell me how long you had to use an outhouse, and just kind of tell me about your daily life, you know, around the house as a farm wife.
Well, I'll tell you first about the first time that I remember about the outhouse, and that's when we lived down there west of the Prairie Creek School, and I was about 4 or 5 years old, and we had our outhouse was out in the orchard. So we had to go through a gate to get out there to it. And anyway, I had to go, and I thought, well, here I go. And I looked up, and that old barred rock rooster was standing right in my path with his head up in the air. And I thought, I said to myself, now, if you don't get on my road, I'm going to run over you, that rooster. And I run over him, and did I ever get a flogging? That's the first time I knew that a rooster would fight you know. So that was my first lesson, getting in trouble.
Okay. Now, how did your mother go about preparing meals? I mean, give me two typical meals and how she fixed them. You know.
Well, Mom always baked her own light bread. She had a big black pan, and she'd bake 6 loaves twice a week in that. And usually they was a hired man there, and he always lived with you and eat with you, and you washed his clothes. And he's just one of the family, you know what I mean. So, and of course, for a long time we had an old iron cook stove, old-fashioned iron cook stove.
And was that heated with wood?
Heated with wood. Yeah. And I forget, the first gas stove we had is when we moved up here by the cemetery. That's been when you was just 2 years old. And we got a gas stove at that time.
Okay. What kind of livestock did your family have, and how much did you have?
Well, you mean my folks? My folks had 2 milk cows, and my dad had 2 jacks and 1 stud horse. Now, do you know what that is, don't you?
No.
They're breeding animals.
What's a jack?
A jack is what you breed a horse mare to get a mule. And if you want another jack, you breed the jack to the jenny to get either another female or a male. Now that's where you get your mules at, is from a jack.
Generally, what kind of livestock did your family have, and how much did you have?
Well, I can't remember. After I got big enough to know, when we lived over there on where Owen does now, they milked about 25 cows. And when we first moved there, we farmed with horses, and we had about 10 horses to farm with, horse machinery. That's and we always had 400 or 500 chickens. And one year we had 80 geese up there, and
how did you travel and get around before you had an automobile?
Well, in a wagon and 2 horses.
Did you have a buggy or anything?
Yeah, we had a buggy. But all tie hauling and all of that kind of stuff was done with a team of horses and a regular high wheel wagon.
Did you ride just a horse, a single lone rider a lot or not?
Yeah, with a saddle on it.
Okay. Was it commonly? I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
So you had one horse and one buggy, or did you have?
We had a buggy and we had a carriage. We hitched, the horse that I rode to high school on had a mate. They was both black. And that's what we used when we drove the carriage, you know, when there's going to be more than can ride in a buggy.
What was it like to ride in a buggy as opposed to a car? I mean,
Well,
is there anything significant?
we never thought anything about. That's all we had, and it's all we knew about. But I will remember one thing about the buggy. I mean, it was special, different. When one of my little brothers died, my granddad went to town, and I went with him to get the casket, and we set it across in front of us on that, you know, if you know how a buggy's fixed across the front. It was sitting there across in front of us, you know. That's how we got the undertaker never, you didn't take him to the undertaker, he took care of him at home. And oh, when Willie died, I had to whoop and cough at the same time he did. That's what killed him, but he was younger than I was, and he was cutting teeth at the same time. And he couldn't stand that. It made me sick, but I mean, it didn't harm me. And anyway, I didn't even know he died. They didn't tell me he died. And anyway, I know everybody was gone, and somebody was staying there with me, and I didn't know what they're staying there for. And I know I went through the house back and forth calling him. I wanted him to go play with me, and I didn't know he was dead. You know, some of the neighbors stayed there with me, of course, you know, while, but I didn't know he was dead until. And I know I can remember going, and I remember the carpet. They used to have carpet on the floor, not rugs like you got now, but a carpet, a carpet on the floor. And I can remember it was red with great big yellow flowers in it. I can still see that carpet on the floor, what we had.
When did your family first get a automobile?
In 1926.
That's the one we got married in.
Really? That was the what do you call it, the Ford?
It was a Ford touring car, model 1926.
And your dad bought that, or?
Yes, and I was a driver.
When did you first acquire an automobile?
Well, we lived where Owen does now, and we didn't know that Pop was going to get one. And about evening, just about dusk, his name was, and I think he run that garage where the wash house is now, where we go over at Clinton. That was the garage then. Let's see, Stoppenberg was his name. And about dusk, he brought that new Ford touring car, four-door touring car, where Pop had bought it. He never told us he had bought it. Of course, we thought that was something out of this world. We had never had a car before.
Did it? It wasn't like they all had to crank.
You had to crank it. Oh yeah, you had to crank it.
When did you go to school? Or?
Well, I went to about the 7th grade. That was the limit to me. When we moved away from there, coming here, I never did go to school anymore. But Robert and Geraldine, my younger sisters and brother, they did.
What was your school like, grade school like?
Oh,
Describe it.
they had poor teachers. They had teachers that we went to that didn't know as much as some of the 8th graders here. Yeah,
And was that in Kentucky there?
that was in Kentucky. Correct.
What was the schoolhouse like? Was it
Yeah, of course, he didn't ever see the old Rock Creek School. It's just about like the old Rock Creek School out there used to be, but you never did see it. Georgie, she did, didn't she?
I didn't go to school.
No, but you seen it. It was there.
Yeah,
Well, that was what it looked like. Just a little wooden
just a plain wood
building.
house with, you had a water bucket,
Did you have benches or desks or anything?
Yeah,
desk.
It had a blackboard across one end of the school, one side of it, either one end or one side.
What kind of activities or games did you play at school in grade school that you remember?
Mainly ball game.
Like baseball? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, describe your grade school and like an average day.
Oh boy. Well, there was 2 of us in the 1st grade, and she stood in one corner and me in the other corner most of the day. We was bored to death. We didn't know what to do, and she had curls and I had long braids, and I'd slip over and yank her curls, and she'd yank mine, and then one of us would holler or squeal, and then up to the corner we went. Then the teacher, she had, of course you don't remember that, she done her hair up in biscuits all around her head, you know, and whatnot. And of course, I'd stand there like so tired, you know, and she'd have a class going, and I'd sneak out, and I'd get up there just as close as I could get to stick my finger in the middle of one of them biscuits without, and finally she'd turn her head and hit my finger, see. Just such stuff as that. We didn't have nothing else to do. And another thing, maybe I shouldn't tell this on here on there. Anyway, when we had our little arithmetic class, she put the numbers on the board and we copied them. You know how they do the 1st graders and that kind of stuff. Anyway, Roy Horn, Ori Westerfield, and they was 8th graders at that time. And she'd call their class up there, and they'd sit in the seats there, and I and Edna would be up at the board copying them numbers, see. Well, I'd get over there and I'd tickle her, or she'd tickle me, whichever one it was, and then we'd wet our pants, and then it would run and trickle off of the stage and run down, and them 8th graders, they just hold their feet up and let it run under.
All right, go on into high school. What was your high school like?
Well,
And when did you graduate?
well, I graduated in 29. That's the same year we got married, too.
What was high school like an average day?
Oh, well, I don't know. It was just, it's all I knew, you know. It just the system we had there is just all I knew.
Were there several classes in the one room where you learned, or I mean?
No, we had a different room for each class, and you know, like that.
You rode horses there, or?
Yeah, we rode horseback to high school, and then I got the cows as I come back, drove them to the house, went down to the bottom pasture over there, and brought them up to the house. And then the next morning I had to take them back down there before I could go on to school.
What was your first job that you where you got paid?
To get paid in, working on a farm here.
Whose farm? Where was
Must
it?
have been over at our house.
It was.
First job
It was. It's over for her dad. Had been before we was ever married, though. That's where I seen her at first.
How old were you when you first got it?
15 probably.
I was 14 years old when we got here in this country, but it wasn't but about a month till I was 15. And so I always worked after I got here. Well, I had a job just like somebody else, you know what I mean.
When and where and how did you meet Dad?
He come over to our house. I didn't know anybody like him existed. And he come walking up the road, and I was hitching up my horse to go. I guess I must have gonna have to get a few groceries that day. I'd go in the buggy once in a while if I needed to get some groceries. And he come walking up the road. We didn't know him, met him. You know who he was. And Pop hired him. That's who he worked for, the first Pop, at our house.
Just as a farm
Just a
hand?
farm, yeah, just on a farm.
So how long were you, how long did you know each other before you got married?
Oh, about 4 or 5 years, 4 years maybe. Something like that.
So you were only 15 or so when you.
Yeah, I was going to high school. See, I just,
Did you?
That's all he was too. I mean, just a year older than I was.
Oh.
We both just kids.
Did you like him at first, or did you grow to like him?
Well, I never thought much about it the first time I seen him. You know, he just somebody popped up out of nowhere, and Pop hired him, and then he was there. I forget how long, but then.
When did you think that you wanted to marry Mom?
Well, quite a little while before I got her.
Was it when you first went there, or?
Yeah, soon after anyway.
What's the? Tell me the first time you ever saw her. What happened?
We had us down to Prairie Creek School when you was riding back and forth to high school on a horse. I used to meet her down at that Prairie Creek School, and if she's coming home from high school, and have a little chat with her. It's only half a mile from there up to where we lived at, see.
After he left there, and Pop seen that we were kind of sweet on one another, why, when he'd come over, he'd blow the light out. You know, we just had lamps then, or sit in the dark.
So did he go away?
No, he didn't go away. Bad things don't usually go away, do they?
What was your wedding like?
Well, it wasn't a big wedding. It was in the church over here at Warpella, Christian church. They had church there that night, and that's when we was married, and Bill and Mary Sampson was married just ahead of us, and they was there with us.
After church.
Yeah, and that's been 60, will soon be 64 years ago.
Do you remember what the weather was like that night?
Yes, it was just on the first day of October, and it was pretty chilly. Not cold, but chilly for a touring car.
Which was, it was open, the top was open or something?
Yeah,
Had side curtains.
they had side curtains you could use, but we didn't have them on.
Okay, what was your wedding like?
It was over here at Warpella Christian Church. Bill Lambert and Mary Sampson got married 1 week, and in 2 weeks we got married. We stood up with them, and then they stood up with us over there at Warpella. And the same preacher that married us married my folks.
Were there was it just you two, or were there guests, or?
No, well, Mom went to our wedding, and she didn't go to Mary and Bill's, but then, of course, they stood up with us, like I said, and we stood up with them. That's all was there.
How did you get to your wedding? Like automobile? Or?
They had a new Ford touring car. That's what we went in.
When we was married, I walked from over there to Atlanta and bought my wedding suit and walked back. Now smoke that in your pipe.
Where did you first live after you were married?
Chicago. We went straight up there the next day, wasn't it? The next day after we was married, we went to Chicago, wasn't it?
Where did you live and what was
Well, there on Lawndale Avenue.
what was life like up there?
Well, it's different than it was at home, I'll tell you that. Different than what we used to. And anyway, the landlady there, she was Jewish. And her husband was supposed to have been in jail, but one night I heard the office commotion and knocking on the door, you know, woke me up. And he had got out and come home and had poured acid in her face. Come in, and she didn't know he was out. And anyway, they called the sheriff, and they come and knocked on the door just a little bit after that he went, and he went on and went downstairs on the outside of the house. You know, how they got them outside stairways. And but the sheriff come then before too long and knocked on our door and said, "Policeman, policeman." You know, kept saying that. And of course, we got up, but then he was already gone. And I don't know whether they ever did find him or not, or catch him or not.
So then from there you lived in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What was that like? What was it like?
Well, of course, we both worked every day outside of Sunday, and we worked about all winter. We come home for Christmas, and when we got back, we didn't have much work to do after that. So I forget if I run out of the job first or whether she did.
I didn't run out of no job.
No, it was me run out of the job. And so it wasn't enough to keep both of us, and so we come home.
Where did you work up there?
We work for the R. Donnelly Company, a printing company, makes catalogs and all kinds of books and stuff, and it's set right out on clear to the east end of 22nd Street, right next to the lake, set right almost right on the lake. That's where I spent all my time working up there.
How did you get to work?
How
did you get to work?
The streetcar.
Anything about that you remember?
Yeah. One time I caught the streetcar, and I think we was around 3400 West, and we caught it there on 22nd Street, and I rode it on the outside. I couldn't get in, it's full. Clear to the jumping off place.
Was it cold that day?
Yes, sir.
But I know one morning there was a snow on the ground, and of course people just piled out there to catch that next streetcar. And this woman slipped and fell, and people just walked all over her. They never give her a chance to get up even. They just keep walking. She couldn't get up, you know.
How did the Great Depression affect your lives?
Well, it was from hand to mouth, mister.
What changed? What?
You could buy, I forget, we got them little cans of pork and beans. I forget just how big they was for, I don't know what, a nickel or something like that. A can, 10 cents or something like that. Meat.
Bacon, Joel Bacon, I think it was a nickel a pound.
Yeah, nickel a pound. We bought that right over. We bought it here, and we bought it in McLean, same way.
Were you ever worried that you weren't going to have enough, or that you were going to?
No, we always, if nothing else, we'd go out and shoot us a rabbit or two and have fresh meat.
How did your neighbors feel about life at that time? I mean, was there?
Well, most of them were just about like us, I guess. Of course, you could buy butter for little or nothing right up here at the store. We used to buy Mrs. Lee's butter all the time when we lived out in the country out there when Virginia was just a small girl. I shucked corn all winter long for O.K. Matheny, and that was the winter that President Roosevelt was elected. The time he was elected. He was elected just a while after that. We still had our corn, and I shucked all winter long for him. And when we got through, he didn't have a cent to pay me with. So he said, "Well, how about me giving you corn, so much a bushel to pay it with?" I said, "Okay." And I think I made a nickel a bushel.
No, 15 cents.
How much?
15 cents.
What'd she say?
15 cents.
Well, I made 15 cents a bushel on it, and kept it till. So she bought us some shoes worth of profit I made.
And anyway, we'd go to the movies, and then when it come time to go home, it was dark. We didn't have any lights on that little old car that we had, and we'd go till we seen a car coming, and we'd pull off the side of the road till they got past, see, because we didn't have any lights. It was against the law to be without lights. So we'd pull off the side of the road until the car got by, and then we'd go ahead, you know.
Okay, how did World War II affect your lives?
Well, it affected me when we lived over to Clinton. I had to go to Clinton probably twice a week. I'd be called in there. They was wanting to get me in. I was farming over there. I had that 203 acres of ground over there, and this cripple foot right here is the only thing that saved me. My dad was cutting Timothy hay, horse hay, to feed the horses, and I was out there with him, and I had my little dog along, and he jumped up a little baby rabbit, a little one, and I was trying to keep him from catching the rabbit, and I stepped my foot in front of my dad's sickle right there, and the mowing machine, and that's what cut my foot pretty near off. And it took a year and a half for that to ever get to where I could really walk on it good. Walked on crutches forever and ever.
See, that's why his big toe sticks up.
Yeah.
And the others, he walks on them. They're turned under. He hasn't got any leaders under them. Right?
Yeah, they're all cut off and tied back together, but they're all too short.
How did you and the other men around the area feel about the Germans and the Japanese during World War II?
Oh, really? I really couldn't. I don't think I could hardly explain that. I never heard a whole lot about it. So, John Warner over here, he had to go, but they didn't take me on account of this foot. I'd have had to go right along with John Warner.
this is the last question. If tomorrow you were physically and financially able to do anything you wanted to do in the world, what would you do tomorrow?
Probably go to McDonald's and get us a dinner and go down to the lake and eat it. I'm going to leave you with a modest person, not fancy or ritzy.
If tomorrow you were physically and financially able to do anything you wanted to in the whole world, what would you do?
Well, I guess for me and Mom and the kids to take it easy.